Section 3.2 is on compound statements and connectives. Compound statements can be formed by taking simple statements and connecting them with these words. Things like, I will go to the pool and then I will go shopping. I will go to the pool or I will go shopping. If I go to the pool, then I won't go shopping. Or I go to the pool if and only if I go shopping. Those are just a couple word examples of compound statements. The connectives are and, or, if then, if and only if. So let's look at each one individually. And statements. When two statements are represented by P and Q, the compound and is written symbolically as this, P upside down V, Q. So when you see the upside down V, you need to say to yourself the word and. Don't say upside down V. It is called a conjunction, and it is similar to intersection that we had in Chapter 2. Remember, the intersection set looked like an upside down U, so this just has a pointy little top there. So two simple statements. P is Harvard is a college. Q is Disney World is a college. And I would like to write out the word statement for symbolically P and Q. And the way to do that is Harvard is a college and Disney World is a college. So these are the two simple statements. Harvard is a college, that's that one. Disney World is a college is that one. And all we did is join them with the word and. This down here says P and not Q. Remember what that is, the tilde is the not. So if I put those together in words, I'm looking at Harvard is a college and Disney World is not a college. Now when you do these, you don't have to do the bold. I'm just putting the bold in here for today to help you remember that the not is the tilde there. Here is a little chart for some symbolic statements and some English statements that are similar to just saying and. So we've just learned that P and Q is this translation, P and Q, but it could translate a little differently. It could be P but Q. It could be P yet Q and P nevertheless Q. I've not seen the yet and the nevertheless that commonly, but I have seen the and obviously and the but. So it's after 5 p.m. and they are working. You could say it's after 5 p.m., but they are working. It's after 5 p.m., yet they are working. And it is after 5 p.m., nevertheless, they are working. So when we do these, here's just a little thought. You should circle your connectives and underline the not, just to help you suss out how things have to go together. So here's two little statements. P is the stove is hot. Q is it is time to sleep. Write the following compound statement in its symbolic form. The stove is hot, that's P, and, remember, circle our connectives and underline any not. We don't have a not. Our connective for and is this, and it is time to sleep is Q. So our translation is just P and Q. Two new statements. P is I'm old. Q, you're young. Write this in symbolic form. You're not young, but I'm old. Now remember, but is like and, so there's our upside down V. You're not young means we need a tilde, and young is Q. So you're not young, but I'm old. So let's write that again. Not Q and P. Or statements. The compound either or is written symbolically as P or Q. It is called a disjunction. And the connective or means P or Q or both. And we don't have to use the either. Most times you don't see either. It is similar to union in Chapter 2. Remember, union is a U, which looks a lot like that V. So the bill receives majority approval. Q is the bill becomes law. I want to translate this into words. P or Q, so I just need to substitute in the bill receives majority approval for P, and the bill becomes law for Q, which will give me this statement. The bill receives majority approval, or, there's our connective, or, the bill becomes a law. The next says P or not Q, so I need to keep P what it was up here, and it's still or, but it's not Q. Will give me the bill receives majority approval. That is the P. There's our connective of or. The bill does not become a law, and I needed the not in there because of the tilde. If-then statements. When two statements are represented by P and Q, the compound if-then is written symbolically as P with this arrow Q. This is called the conditional. This is important. Whatever letter comes first is your if part, and whatever comes second is your then part. So P is Ed as a poet, Q is Ed as a writer. This right here says if P, then Q. So I know there's going to be an if and a then. So when I write these out like this as I'm building it, I just separate it out a little bit. If what? If Ed is a poet, that's here. Then Ed is a writer, that's going to go here. It looks a little bit more neat right here. If Ed is a poet, then Ed is a writer. This still has an arrow. It is still going to be an if, then. But notice what's first here. Q is first. Therefore, Q is the if part. So if Ed is a writer, then Ed is a poet, which looks like this. If Ed is a writer, then Ed is a poet. Notice here we have tilde here and tilde there, so we're going to need a not with our Q and our not with our P. It is still an if-then because of that arrow, so I can do if, I can do then, and Q came first, therefore this is the writer part. But it's not if Ed is a writer, because of the not, it's if Ed is not a writer. The P will go in the second position. Same idea, not P means I need to say then Ed is not a poet. So that's what this looks like. If Ed is not a writer, then Ed is not a poet. The writer was the Q, that's why it went first. The poet part is the P, that's why it went second. And because of the not, we have the tilde. Because of the not, we have the tilde. Now there's a couple different translations for this if P then Q. It can be translated as P is sufficient for Q. It can be translated as Q is necessary for P. And you can also see P only if Q. So order matters if the if part comes first, regardless of the sentence structure. The if part comes first, regardless of the sentence structure. So let's take a look at this little chart here. This is our standard. When you see the P, and you have the arrow and the Q, that translates to if P then Q. So here's our two simple statements. If a person is a father, then that person is a male. This symbol still looks like this up here, but they're changing the sentence structure. It says Q if P. Remember, the first part is your if part. It just happens to come second in the sentence. They have varied the sentence structure. So a person is a male if that person is a father. Still says if a father, then a male. If a father, then a male. This could also translate as P is sufficient for Q. And when you do sufficient, you add this being rather than if then. So this translates to being a father is sufficient for being a male. If somebody is a father, then they are a male, and being the father is sufficient to prove that they are a male. Q is necessary for P. This goes the other way around. Being a male is necessary for being a father. Being a male is necessary for being a father. If you're not a male, you can't be a father. That's why being a male is necessary for being a father. Another translation is P only if Q. P only if Q. A person is a father only if that person is a male. Now there is a difference between only if and if. A person is a father only if that person is a male. That person's got to be a male first before he can be considered a father. And this is the same idea here, but it's just written with a comma instead. Only if Q, P. Only if a person is a male is that person a father. Has to be a male first before he can be considered a father. Now the sufficient and the necessary can be a little bit confusing, so here's just some stuff that might help you. P is sufficient for Q is the same as if P then Q. There's our statement and symbols, and you change the verb to being. So being P is sufficient for being Q. Just like this one back here, when we switched here, being a father is sufficient for being a male. So when you're talking about the sufficient or the necessary, you're going to change your sentence to have the word being in it. Q is necessary for P. Q is the then part, and P is the if part, and you still change the verb to being. Being Q is necessary for being P. Being a male is necessary for being a father. You have to be considered a male before you can be a father. Whatever comes after the only if is the then part. Remember, I just said if is not the same as only if. When you see only if, it is your then part. So good question here in a conditional statement. How do I tell the sufficient part from the necessary part? Well, the sufficient condition of a conditional statement is the part that precedes the arrow. So whatever comes before the arrow is the sufficient part. It's also called the antecedent. It's what comes first. The necessary condition is the part that follows the arrow. So before the arrow is sufficient, after the arrow is the necessary part, and it's called the consequent. We have the antecedent and we have the consequent. Here's another example that might help you with the sufficient and necessary idea. So P is a statement, Fido is a dog. Q is a statement, Fido is an animal. If I want to do if P, then Q, then this is my statement. If Fido is a dog, that's my P, then Fido is an animal, that's my Q. Now remember, sufficient, what precedes the arrow has to be the sufficient part. So Fido is a dog is my sufficient part. And the last part is Fido is an animal. So remember also we have to change this to being. So being a dog, that was the P part, is sufficient for being an animal. That was the Q part. This says it the other way around. Being an animal is necessary for being a dog. Necessary is what followed the arrow. What follows the arrow is my Q. So Fido is an animal is the Q. It is what is being an animal is necessary for being the dog, which is the P. So think about the logic of this. If Fido is a dog, then he is an animal. If he's a dog, then he is part of the greater animal kingdom. Being a dog is sufficient for putting him in the greater animal kingdom. But if we know the other way around, being an animal is necessary for being a dog. If you're not an animal, you cannot be considered a dog.